Welcome to the second in a series of noon lectures to be sponsored by the Associated Student Speakers Program. Our guest today is Mr. Michael Hannon, a member of CORE, the United Civil Rights Committee, and the Socialist Party. Mr. Hannon is currently on probation from the Los Angeles Police Force on charges of conduct unbecoming a police officer, in part relating to his activities as a member of CORE and the United Civil Rights Committee. He has in recent weeks addressed various groups and rallies in protest against bigotry and what he has labeled right-wing front groups within the Los Angeles Police Force. I now present to you Mr. Michael Hannon, who will speak on the police and civil rights in Los Angeles.
Thank you. You know, it was about the time that second rock bounced off the roof of a patrol car down there in Watts last August that Chief Parker was already running full tilt for the microphones so that he could tell the whole world that the civil rights movement was responsible for everything that happened. The chief's first statement when he got to the television was that agitators have been in that neighborhood for 2 years telling those people they're deprived, and they're believing it. And this is the result. You know, they're obviously too stupid to know that they're hungry until an agitator comes and tells them so. But the city's most eminently successful agitator went on to even greater agitation. His next statements occurred on Saturday, and at this time he was telling the television audience at the height of the riot, well, things are getting back to normal now. We're on the top and they're on the bottom. The good Mayor Yorty followed him up and presented a similar kind of a line. Yorty's answer was that it was subversive groups creeping around in the bushes, organizing this whole thing and setting it up. The interesting thing about Mayor Yorty is that although he insisted that he had information about these subversive groups, he wouldn't tell you what groups. Because when the reporters asked him, Mr. Mayor, what groups are you talking about? The mayor says, well, that's mumble confidential. Then they started circulating this rumor about cadres of Negroes with red armbands that were running around directing everything. And this rumor enjoyed great popularity until nobody could be found who had actually seen such a person. And then it kind of died out too. The significant thing is that not a single shred of evidence has been adduced by any of these politicians to prove that there was any kind of organization in the riots, or that any kind of groups were behind them, or that any kind of subversives were responsible for them, be they left subversives or nationalists. And believe me, if there were subversives responsible for this riots, they were beyond a doubt the world's most incompetent subversives, because they didn't do any of the things a high school kid would have thought of if he'd sat down and consciously planned, how can I commit sabotage, how can I really mess up the city of Los Angeles? You know, nobody took a 20-minute drive and threw one of those Molotov cocktails into the hills out here and set them on fire. And everybody in the area knows it takes every fire department in the southern half of the state to put them out every time they burn. But nobody did this. Nobody drove up and tried to set fire to the hills up above Glendale. Nobody bothered. None of these sinister subversive groups. None of them took the trouble to take some of those weapons that were obtained from the pawn shops and go down to the oil fields in Torrance, just about 5 minutes drive to the south of the riot area, and try to fire the oil fields. There was no significant attack on telephone communications. There was no attack on the electric power lines that bring most of our whole area's power in from Boulder Dam. None of these things were done. And so we must conclude that these subversive groups are a figment of the good mayor's imagination. And if he really believes it, you know, the guy must be smoking pot, because there's there's no evidence at all. I think it's significant to note that the destruction was, in fact, confined to the central ghetto area. It was directed at the visible symbols of oppression right there at hand, at the things that were irritants right in the lives of the people who were engaged in this revolt. It was directed first at the police, Then at the pawn shops and the little cockroach capitalists, you know, the small merchants who live by engaging in what is politely termed sharp business practices, you know, selling the same television set 7 times and repossessing it. These guys were the people who felt the wrath of the community when the community exploded. I think to make any kind of a rational analysis of what really went on in Watts, we have to go beyond its racial aspects. Sure, it had racial overtones. The race thing is the thing that hits you right in the eye when you first look at it. But a racial analysis is really very superficial because there are more important things about the area that exploded. In the first place, it just wasn't a classic race riot, as we understand that term. There weren't any gangs, organized gangs of Negroes and whites fighting each other out in the streets, such as occurred in Detroit during their famous riots, or such as occurred in L.A. Zoot Suit riots during the war. Secondly, it's significant that although the incident started with an incident involving a Negro woman, there was not a single act of retaliation reported directed against white women. And this is significant when you're talking about, was it a classic race riot? But the most significant thing of all is that this explosion was really confined to one stratum of the Negro community, one segment of that community, not the whole area at all. There's a large area of middle-class Negro housing to the west of the area that really exploded, which was relatively untouched, and this is significant. The area that was involved, the central ghetto area, can be defined in a lot of ways that distinguish it from the rest of the Negro community in Los Angeles. Let's bear in mind some basic facts about this community I'm talking about. It's a rapidly expanding community. There's an immigration of Negroes into Los Angeles, a net increase of 1,000 persons per month. The Negro population of the city has increased from 335 million in 1960 to 420 million today. This is a rapid increase. And the central ghetto area is the place where most of these refugees from Mississippi and Alabama arrive when they first come to our city. Now, what do they find there? The guy who's got a high level of skills, who's got a particularly good education, immediately or very soon finds some kind of work. Now, maybe he's not finding the kind of work that the same level of skills and education would get him if he was white, but he gets a job. And when he gets a job, he makes it out of the ghetto, out to the west side. But the guy from a rural environment, who doesn't have these skills and who doesn't have the kind of skills necessary to sell your labor on this urban job market, this guy is stuck there. He is trapped in this ghetto. He's come to the north to find freedom and the good life and all of the things that he knows other Americans enjoy, and he finds himself trapped in an urban slum. You can define this slum area, the area that exploded, by the housing that's there. In the middle-class Negro sections that didn't explode, you typically find single-family homes occupied by a single family. But in the area that did explode, the typical housing is what used to be a single-family home. Only now it's been chopped up into 3 or 4 little apartments, and these little apartments rent for $50 or $60 or $70 a month, and there's a family in each one of them. It's a great way to make money. You haven't got any morals, you haven't got any conscience, go make money in slum housing. It's the best real estate investment you could possibly invest your money in. You put the people in the houses, you chop it up into these little apartments, you pack them in, you don't spend a single red cent on upkeep. You just let them fall down and deteriorate and fall apart, and you just churn as much profit out of it as you can. And when the place gets so deteriorated that even the city building inspectors are forced to say this is unfit for human habitation, then you just push the building down, and you've still got your investment because the land is where the real value is in the real estate. And there's industry moving into this area that's happy to buy up that land to put up a warehouse or a commercial structure. Unemployment in the Watts area is tremendous. 30% of the adult males in the area are now unemployed. Over 60% of all of the people in that area are subsisting on some kind of welfare or relief payments. And if any of you don't believe that there's an overcrowded job market for a guy with a low level of skill, take a ride down East 5th Street some morning about 3 or 4 or 5 in the morning, and you'll see the sidewalks crowded from the buildings out to the curb. And these crowds of men down there are standing waiting for labor contractors to come by and haul them out to do field work. The contractors take them out and they do a 12 or a 15 hours day's work of good hard field work. They get paid $1 an hour. But they don't come home with $12 or $15 because the contractor charges them about $3.50 to $5 for the bus ride, and he charges them 6 bits for that lunch of a peanut butter sandwich and an orange that they get whether they want it or not. And there are men competing for this kind of work. There are men elbowing each other out of the way to be the first one to get on those buses. And that, to me, is a pretty graphic illustration of just how tight the job market really is, unless you have the kind of advantages that we as relatively middle-class people enjoy. The area that exploded is an area that is also characterized by frustration. And it's frustrated because it has been untouched by any of the movements for social change that exist in this society of ours. The people who are born there find that they are still living in a society that's the same now when they're 17 or 20 or 25 as it was when they were born. Their lives haven't been changed by the civil rights movement or by any of the changes that are going on in our society. The new people, the immigrants, are likewise frustrated because they came here expecting to be admitted into a society to improve their situation and find themselves trapped in this ghetto with the doors shut in their faces. Now, the civil rights movement just has no answers for the ghetto, for the poverty core of the Negro community. Sure, we got programs for the middle-class Negro, the guy who's alienated because he can't buy a house where he wants to buy one, or because he can't get a job that the ordinary college graduate can get. But we just haven't got any programs. We haven't been able to develop any programs that really meet the needs of the people in the ghetto and that are directed towards the things that bug them in their lives. The major effort of the civil rights movement last year was Proposition 14. It was a great effort, albeit an unsuccessful effort. But suppose it had won. What does a fair housing law mean to the guy who hasn't got the money to get out of the ghetto anyway, because this society just doesn't provide work for him, because he hasn't got an opportunity to be employed? What does a fair housing law mean to this guy, to his life personally as an individual? Sure, maybe he can identify, but it doesn't mean anything to him personally. Our employment programs, and I'm speaking of the civil rights movement, have been largely irrelevant to the ghetto. Sure, we broke down Bank of America last spring, but the jobs that were opened up for Negroes with the skills to be tellers and bookkeepers and clerks are simply not jobs that these people in the poverty core of the community are going to be able to take. And even so, even with the Bank of America, even with the food industry, which has been forced to make token compliance with fair employment practices, even so, we're just scratching at the surface of the problem. What, 50 jobs, 100 jobs, 500? We're talking about a community of several million people, a community whose problems are not being addressed. And the civil rights movement, in a meaningful way, has not been able to do anything about it. Now, the good chief of police, of course, blames the whole thing not on the unemployment. He blames it on direct action. You know, they have created an atmosphere of lawlessness down here by these demonstrations. And they've been creating disrespect for law and order. The chief is just exactly 180 degrees out of phase with the truth. It isn't the fact that the civil rights movement has moved too fast, it's the fact that it's moved too slow. It is not the fact that they have been too radical, it's been the fact that they have not been radical enough to come up with radical solutions to radical problems. There is a group in the ghetto that's had some small success in organizing, and that's the nationalists. They articulate well the grievances of that community. But then when it comes around to what are you going to do about it, they haven't got any program either. Because the only program they can project is, well, we will drive the white businessmen out and we'll replace them with black businessmen. the essential contradiction to this is that a black capitalist, to stay in business, is going to have to engage in just exactly the same kind of business practices as the white merchant is, or he's not going to stay in business. He's going to have to extract the same amount of surplus value out of his employees, and he's going to have to extract exactly the same amount of profit out of his customers, or he's just not going to make it. They haven't got any program. And consequently, their organizational efforts have had rather minimal results. The labor movement has no meaningful program, at least prior to the riots, to organize the unemployed. And then on top of that, not only have they not really been addressing themselves to the problems of the people there, but they've been in many cases a hindrance to these people trying to help themselves. Unions, the ILWU is a great example, the Longshore Workers Union. Through using a rigid classification of their membership into Class A and Class B and casual haul members, and through the requirement that to get up each step you have to be sponsored by somebody who's already in that step, and one person can only sponsor one new person. They have actually, the net result of this has been to force Negro dock workers into the casual haul, to keep them working in a situation where they get to pay into the union's coffers, but they don't get any of the benefits of union membership because they're excluded from the welfare and they're excluded from the hospitalization, and they aren't guaranteed time on the docks, and their problems are just not being addressed. When you add this from a relatively good union to the open racism of some of the old craft unions, you result with a situation where instead of appearing as a means of liberation, as a force for freedom, the union movement in that community wears the aspect of just another facet of the white power structure, just another element of this whole massive weight that's on their shoulders and is oppressive. And if the unions have been irrelevant, and if the civil rights movement has been irrelevant in that community, the politicians, by God, have been the worst of all. $22 million worth of poverty funds have not been spent in Los Angeles because Mayor Yorty thinks it's more important that his cronies, whom he calls the taxpayers' representatives, have control over the dispensation of these funds than that the funds get put to work. So the funds haven't been put to work. The Youth Opportunities Board got a $2,729,000 grant last November. Over $1 million worth of that grant is still unspent because of the foot dragging and the go slow approach of our local politicians that have control over it. The Youth Corps comes to Los Angeles. They create 15,000 jobs, or they're supposed to. At the present time, or at least prior to the riots, over 3,000 of those 15,000 jobs remained unfilled because the machinery wasn't there to really push the program. These minuscule programs just haven't addressed themselves to the problem. We talk about a war on poverty. What is this war on poverty? It's a squirt gun fight between little kids. It's not a war. The total appropriation of Johnson's war on poverty for the first year is less than New York City will spend on welfare in that year alone. What kind of a war is that? We can mobilize all of the resources of this society to defeat Germany and Japan in World War II, or to fight in Korea, or to slaughter Vietnamese. But by God, we can't seem to really work up a war when it comes down to solving social problems that affect Americans. Why not? Why can't we? Of course, the liberal politicians aren't the worst. There are some really reactionary elements in this town. Elements represented by the good Mayor Yorty and the good Chief of Police Parker. And they're not going to solve the problems of the ghetto for a very good reason. They don't want them solved. They like the ghetto like it is because they're making money out of it. They don't want to lose a reserve army of unemployed workers in this town that they can use to beat down unions with and they can use to beat down wages with. They want those unemployed people here. They want a ready market for the substandard rentals that they're selling to people in that area because they're making money out of it. Why else would the Real Estate Association pour those hundreds of thousands of dollars into defeating Proposition 14 if they didn't want to didn't think it threatened their nice juicy racket in ghetto housing. They want to keep it just like it is. So they haven't got any real answers to the problems of the ghetto. But they've got an answer. The reactionaries' answer to social problems is copism. We'll just send the police in there and keep that community quiet at all costs. In fact, that's the role of the Los Angeles Police Department in the ghetto, and I say this from personal experience because I worked 5 of my 7 years on the department in the ghetto in Los Angeles. I worked in Newton Street Division, which is the northern half of the area that exploded. And while they have perfectly legitimate functions to serve in that area, the police have an additional function. And that function is to keep that area quiet, to keep the people intimidated, to keep protests down, so that business as usual can go on and money making as usual can prosper. And the social problems, we're not interested in the social problems. We're not social workers, we're cops. And this is the way they relate to the ghetto. This is why elements like Mayor Yorty raise this hysterical cry about hoodlums and subversive elements when they're talking about the people that participated in the Watts Revolt. They want to focus attention on these slogans and these catchwords so that they can avoid focusing any attention on the real social problems of the area. Look at the police department's response to the hostility that has been visibly, patently growing between the entire Negro community and the police. They deny it's real. There isn't any cause for complaint against the Los Angeles Police Department. Anybody who says it is must be some kind of subversive. Parker loves to talk about subversives. You know, this plot to undermine law enforcement and create anarchy so that the other government can come over here and take over, you know. He loves to talk about these kinds of things because it relieves him of any responsibility of having to talk about realities. And one of the realities is this hostility. The civil rights people have been trying to tell the city and tell the police department for years this hostility existed. They deny it exists. That's their public response. You know, our Negroes have it better in Los Angeles than Negroes have it anywhere. Why should they be unhappy here? But their quiet response, the private response, the response directed to the ghetto, has been simply more and more repression, more shows of force, more force. Example, after the Muslim shooting in 1962, what did the department do? It pulled all the one-man radio cars out of the entire Negro community. Only 2-man radio cars could be used in that area because areas where Negroes live are just too dangerous for my officers to be working alone in. And they equipped all the cars in that area with shotguns. There are shotguns in every radio car in Newton and 77th and University divisions. And there aren't any in cars in the Valley or in West L.A. and such places. Oh, there might be a sergeant might carry one around, or they might take one out on a stakeout with them. But they don't carry them around mounted on the dashboard where the people can all see them. And this kind of show of force response has been the department's only response to this hostility. Parker said that he figured a year ago that violence was coming, so he purchased $50,000 worth of helmets for his men. To date, no one has discovered that he's purchased a single penny's worth of information about why the hostility was there or what the police department could legitimately do to alleviate it. Now, I don't want to overemphasize the police role. I think the revolt in Watts grew out of the situation that there were all of these tremendous social problems in the area that were not being satisfied, that were not being solved. But it is undeniable that the police set the spark to all this accumulated fuel, that a police incident was the incident that sparked the riots. Now, whatever actually happened when Marquette Frye and his brother and his mother got arrested down there, the stories that were told of that incident were believable to the people in the area, and they were believed because of the people's long experience in that area with the actual policies and practices of the LA police. What am I talking about? The attitudes. Where I worked in Newton Division for 5 years, the officers had a joke. We called it Occupied Newton. But it was more than a joke. You know, it really represented the kind of feelings that most of the policemen had towards the area and the people in the area. Their attitude was that they worked for the taxpayers, and whoever pictures a black taxpayer. Obviously, these are the people we work on, not the people we work for. There's a double standard of law enforcement. It's a real double standard. Laws are just not enforced in the same fashion in the ghetto as they are out here, or as they are in Highland Park Division, where I also worked. The drunk statute, 647F, is used most of the time to punish contempt of cop. Roust arrests are common. It's a rare young man that grows up in that neighborhood without getting arrested for something by the time he grows up. And how many people in this room have been arrested for anything? Outside of civil rights. Look at the way they would handle a problem, a bar, a real police problem where there's a problem with, say, a bar because homosexuals hang out there or because pills are being sold in this place and they want to do something about it. Out here, I know how they'd handle it. Or on Wilshire Boulevard, I know how they'd handle it. They'd send undercover officers in, they'd put the place under surveillance, they'd find out who was pushing the stuff, and they'd arrest them. And they'd be careful not to grind up any of the solid citizens in this mill. That isn't the way it works on Central Avenue. On Central Avenue, you just solve it in a much easier fashion. You harass the place out of existence. You send 10 officers in, block up the door, shake everybody in the place, search their persons, their clothing, take their ID outside and run it to see who's got a warrant. Anybody's got a knife in his pocket, you book him for suspicion of robbery. And after 4 or 5 days of this, the clientele all leaves and your problem disappears. And it's much easier. Yeah, it's easier. But it does grind up the honest working guy who walks in for a beer, along with the guys who are selling the pills and engaging in the criminal behavior. And this is the kind of double standard that the people are objecting to, and they got real, legitimate reasons to object to it. Of course, the police... the policeman has to live with himself when he's engaging in this kind of behavior, and he has rationalizations. You just blame the poor for their own poverty. That's the simplest way. Obviously, buddy, if you're unemployed, it's your fault. I got a job. You know, look at me. I'm a hard-working, tax-paying citizen bearing on my shuddering shoulders the weight of all of this, these lazy loafers living on this welfare, grinding me down with taxes. God, never ask yourself, though, if you're making this kind of rationalization, how far you've risen up this social ladder. Yeah, look at my own case. I'm born in a lower middle class family. I've got articulate parents that read books and newspapers and that think education is important, that push me all the way through school. Never any question about whether I'm going to go to college. I'm just going to go to college because it's expected of me, so I went to college. And with all of these advantages, I have risen all the way up to this magnificent position of being a police officer. You know, I haven't gone anywhere. So what right have I got to sit on my moral pedestal and look down my nose at the guy who gets born to a family where his mother survives on county aid, where God knows where his father is, who goes to schools with kids from similar home backgrounds, where nobody expects to go to college because they don't know anybody who goes to college, where their parents don't read very often, where they have limited vocabularies, where they don't have all of the advantages I've enjoyed. And this guy hasn't raised himself up out of that ghetto, pulling himself up by his bootstraps. He's done just exactly as good as I have. Just exactly as good as I have. What right have I to criticize him? Of course, the policemen have it easier. The ideologues of the far right structure all these rationalizations for them in nice, neat, intellectualized fashion. The coffee room at Newton Station used to look like the annex to Poor Richard's bookshop. There was piles of the Mannion Forum and the Dan Smoot Report and Human Events and American Opinion and Lifelines. You name it, it was there. The Birch Society is very proud of its Support Your Local Police campaign. They use it as a vehicle to recruit police officers. Rousselot claims he's got 2,000 dues-paying members among peace officers in Los Angeles County, and I have no reason to believe that he's exaggerating. Of course, Chief Parker says he doesn't know of any Birchers. He doesn't personally know anybody who belongs to the society, and since it's not on a subversive list, it's outside the scope of his jurisdiction. Keep that in mind when I'm telling you about how he investigated me. We have on the Los Angeles Department our own little right-wing front group, FIPO, the Fire and Police Research Association. They go on television to present an expose of folk singing. You know, it's all really a communist plot, part of cybernetic warfare to entrap youthful minds. They publish their monthly little hate sheet and a lot of other propaganda. They attack guys like Thomas Braden, the Board of Education chairman. They publish articles like Sex Sukarno in the State Department. Great article, just a great article. The State Department is supposed to provide prostitutes for all the visiting foreign diplomats, and Sukarno has all these odd tastes and habits in women, and they object to this. But by far the nuttiest thing they produced was a thing called the ultimate secret weapon. You know what our secret weapon is? We, America, our secret weapon. See, in that other government, they're all atheists. So they don't believe in an afterlife, in another world. So they would never voluntarily start a thermonuclear war, which would bring an end to the human race, because that would terminate communism forever. But we, Christian nations, we suffer no such temporal limitations. And this meant... Now, I'm running out of time. This mentality is not confined to the lower levels of the police department. We put the author of this on as a witness in my trial, and the department's prosecutor described this as, quote, strongly anti-communist, strongly pro-American material. So you see, this kind of mentality isn't confined to a few kooks at the bottom of the department. It rises rather high. And the reason the police encourage this kind of behavior is that it helps them convert police officers into the kind of tools that are willing to solve the reactionaries' social problems for them. That's why they want them in this frame of mind. That's why the Birch Society and other right-wing elements spend so much time and effort trying to recruit police officers. The reactionaries will not solve the social problems of the ghetto. And they want police officers who are willing to solve those problems by keeping the lid clamped on them. And that's the background for it. Liberals on the police department, and there are guys on the department with good liberal, healthy outlooks on things. And they're no, I'm not kidding. There really are. There's 205 Negro officers, for instance, out of the 5,100 policemen. There's one guy who's the president of one of the area councils for CDC. There are other guys, but they've got to keep very, very quiet about it on the job, because if they express any kind of the slightest expression of liberal attitudes, the department immediately sits on them very hard. I know a Negro officer who was accused of being a communist by his division commander because he'd said things favorable to the civil rights movement. This and my case too illustrates the anxiety of the department to express any kind of expression of liberal attitudes. Now, when I went on the department, I was a pretty apolitical guy, and my politicalization developed out of my experience of working in that ghetto station for 5 years. And it didn't come on me like a flash of lightning, you know, from the clouds. It was a thing that developed. And I went into that area with the same middle-class spectacles that I imagine most of you still have. And I didn't see it like it really was. In fact, I didn't even really start to see it until after they integrated police cars in 1961, and I acquired a Negro partner with whom I worked for 7 months. And this hastened the process along of shattering my middle-class glasses so that I could see the ghetto a little bit, so I could begin to see it sort of from the point of view that this man was able to see it from. And it's really different. The total condition of life of people living there is different from anything that I experienced growing up in a white middle-class community. And I learned that social class in this society of ours is not just a textbook abstraction, it's a real living reality, and it feels and tastes and smells, and it's there. And that people in that social class, in that ghetto class, living in that community, the things that push on them are different. The way they react to the society are different. The way they relate to police, the way they relate to school teachers, the way they relate to the government, the way they relate to their wives, the way they relate to themselves, the way they see the whole world is just different. And it's necessarily different because their life experiences have been different. And this land of opportunity we love to talk about. You know, all these slogans show up in all their tawdry shoddiness. And they show as the kind of real fake that they are. when you get down and actually see the reality of social class in this society that conditions those opportunities, that makes the accident of birth determine what opportunities are open to you and what you're going to make out of your life. You don't make it on what you do. You make it on where you were born in this society. Sure, you can elevate yourself from the lower class to the upper lower class, or from a job as a policeman to a job as a lawyer, maybe. But nobody is, with the very few exceptions, are making these great jumps that the Horatio Alger stories tell about. They just don't exist. And necessarily they don't exist because they're next to impossible. The class lines are that rigid, and the distinctions are that great. Well, after my rationalizations really started to crumble, I joined the Socialist Party. And I was at an SP meeting with my wife in April of 1963 when somebody came in and said CORE was having a demonstration and that they were marching in solidarity with the demonstrators in Birmingham. This was during the fire hosing and the police dogs incident in Birmingham. And we took part in that march, which went from Vernon and Central to the City Hall, right through Newton Division. And we started noticing the police cars going by this line of about 1,000 people were slowing down as they got to our point in the line, and the officers were giving it this pitch, out the window. And the next day when I came to work, the roof had fallen in. A sign on the blackboard asked me if my feet were sore, and most of the white officers weren't speaking, and the ones that were speaking, the right-wing types, were just hysterical, Were you down there in that parade with those nigger communists and in that monkey parade? This was the language, and this was the kind of attitude. The department's official feeling was displayed 2 months later when I got my rating report. You get them every 6 months. Prior to this, my ratings had been pretty good because I write good reports and I keep busy. But this rating, I fell from the upper 25% to the lower 10%, surprisingly enough. And the remarks on the back explaining this said that I had been in demonstrations for a, quote, cause group, unquote, which caused supervisors to seriously doubt my loyalty to the department, and that I was probably, quote, a grave threat to the national peace and security as well, unquote. I blew up. I went running all over the police department, banging on desks and threatening to sue everybody in sight for libel. And when I got to as high as my division commander, he told me that, Hannon, don't worry about it. We're going to get you. We know who you are. You're not going to last 6 months. We're just going to add up each little thing and we're going to build a case. Well, I went over his head and I went all the way to the police commissioner's secretary, and when I got back to work a couple of days later, I'd been on days off, the commander grabs me at the door and hustles me into his office to explain that he really hadn't said all those things he'd said the other day. And they climbed down off my back on the job. But they didn't stop building their case, and they spared no expense building their case. A Nicaraguan student from City College started showing up at political meetings. Great guy. He was a real red hot. In my country, we don't have any of this nonviolent stuff. I don't understand this nonviolent stuff. If we had a demonstration, the police would come in with machine guns and they just mow us down. Why, and he didn't believe nonviolence worked here either. It was all a fake. So he explained it to him. He explained the dynamics of it. He explained, how the movement has been successful in those areas where it's been successful. And then, well, what are your credentials? What do you know about it? What have you ever done? This police officer was wearing a radio in his clothing, a thing called a Fargo device, that broadcast all of these conversations to 2 other officers outside who were tape recording. And when the trial started, we went into court to get discovery, and we got 9.5 hours of tape made by this procedure, by this agent provocateur. So they weren't sparing any expense. Before the suspension, I was subjected to 3 days of questions and answers by Internal Affairs Division, and then they brought their 10-count indictment. 2 of the counts were perfectly legitimate. They caught me sleeping while I was supposed to be working the desk in the early morning watch at Newton. Standard 5-day suspension, and they wanted to give me my 10 days, no sweat, But attached to this, there were the 8 other political counts, and I'll go through them briefly. The first one was that I had participated in a demonstration to criticize Johnson's foreign policy. And they found me guilty of that in that a public employee should not be heard to derogate the duly elected officials of the people. Number 2 said that I had calumniated the president for carrying a sign that said, quote, "What Khrushchev did in Hungary, Johnson is doing in the Dominican Republic." And I was found guilty of that. Counts 3 through 6 were core demonstrations. They didn't say I did anything wrong, just that I was there. And that they hoped demonstrations, you know, the innuendo was they wished demonstrations would go away. And they were unhappy with me because I didn't want them to go away. When we went into trial, they tried to find a specific act of misconduct of some kind on somebody's part that they could impute to me to go with that demonstration. And the board duly found that all of these things happened, some of the most preposterous things. For instance, when Ralph Forbes, the Nazi, showed up at one of the Selma demonstrations, I was a picket line monitor, and I was telling the people, stay in line, ignore him, ignore that swine, don't pay any attention to him. And that I had stopped, the testimony was I had stopped people from leaving the line to go towards Forbes, and that after he was attacked, I and some other people protected him by getting around him and with our bodies. And yet they found me guilty on that count for inciting the crowd to riot against Forbes by using the word swine. So you can see how objective they were. 7 and 8 were articles. An article I wrote about the police department, an anonymous editorial for LA Correlator. Talked about the bigotry on the department and the Birchism on the department. And we put on witnesses to prove that everything I said was true. And they wouldn't hear those witnesses. They said, the truth or falsity of this doesn't matter. All that matters is whether you criticize the police department. And if you did, that's misconduct, because if the public hears criticism, they won't cooperate with us. And so I was duly found guilty there. Those were the charges against me, and that's what resulted in my suspension. And that gives you an idea of the attitude and the environment inside of the Los Angeles Police Department. Well, now, who gained the most out of the riots? Perhaps the reactionaries did. Perhaps they've been able to churn up more support for their solution to social problems, copism. But if they win, if this is the result that came out of the Watts revolt, we are condemning ourselves to more revolts, because it's the problems that caused it. It's the unsolved problems of the area that caused it. It's the frustrations that are not being alleviated that caused it. And if we simply insist on doing the same old things worse, then we're just going to bring the situation on us again worse. The whole revolt itself showed the utter bankruptcy of copism as an answer to social problems. $50 million worth of property damage, 33 people dead, 29 of whom, by the way, were participants in the riot. And it's also significant to note that none of those snipers that got so much publicity ever shot anybody. I think this is a significant fact. 3,000 people arrested, held at bail schedules 2 or 3 times normal, getting exorbitant sentences for the most minor offenses. I was down there checking sentences for some of the people that copped out for ACLU. And some of the that copped out to curfew violations got 180-day sentences. That's 6 months in jail for curfew. You'll notice that Lieutenant Thomas O'Neill just walked out of court scot-free. But perhaps the other side will prevail and will make more political capital out of the riot. There are liberal voices being raised now. There are funds now becoming available to meet the ghetto's problems. The poverty funds not as being cut. Other funds are being available. Let's hope so. But for God's sakes, if we're going to meet them, let's stop talking the same old wishy-washy, half-hearted, establishment liberal kind of solutions to these problems. We're not going to address ourselves to these problems till we find some real solutions. And that means bringing real equality to this society. That means making a real effort to end class divisions in this society, to erase the class lines that divide us. That means that we've got to put in more into the ghetto than we provide in other areas, because their problems are worse. They deserve more, to make them equal, giving them just the same. The state giving the same facilities to a welfare child as it gives to the child of a millionaire in Bel Air is not equality. That's bourgeois equality, perhaps. That's Johnson equality, perhaps. But it isn't equality, because it isn't equal. The only way they'll be made equal is if they have more advantages, so that to bring them up to the same level that we start at, then we can start talking about equality of opportunity. Then these slogans will have some meaning and not be just canards and shams. We must establish some absolute rights in this country. In a society as wealthy as ours, as prosperous as this one is, living off of the labor, the surplus labor of the whole world, it is absolutely criminal that this society tolerates within its midst classes that are as depressed and as economically disadvantaged as Watts, as Appalachia, as Harlem, as all of the other pockets of poverty and oppression in this country. American citizens must insist that they have an absolute right to an education, regardless of what class they were born in. That they have an absolute right to health, to decent health, to medicine, to doctors. We need medical care as an absolute right for all citizens. We need food and housing as an absolute right for all citizens. If you've read the Triple Revolution, if you've read any of the statistics on the Cybernation Revolution, the advance in automation that is chopping more and more and more people out of the job market, you cannot help but face the fact that this society does not provide jobs for everybody in it and can't provide jobs for everybody in it. So you're faced with a choice. Either the reactionary choice of the employed live good and the rest starve on a pitiful charity dole doled out by a Bureau of Public Assistance that's in the hands of Chandler and his appointees. Or else you insist on the right that an American citizen has a right to live just because he's human. And we are not going to be able to make real solutions to these social problems unless we organize ourselves to press for these solutions. The reactionaries, the right wing, the Birch Society has moved the political dialogue to the right simply by the fact that the Birch Society exists. Because it exists, a conservative guy like Thomas Kuchel can pass himself off as a moderate. At the same time, because there is no organized, active left in this society, guys like James Roosevelt, who's a pretty liberal guy, runs for mayor and has to play for the middle of the road, has to mealy-mouth and avoid the issues and get beat overwhelmingly because he can't address himself to the issues without being damned as an extremist, because there isn't anybody willing to be a radical, willing to stand to the left of him. And this is our function as radicals. We provide elbow room for the liberals to compromise. And if we're willing to do that, we're not going to get the jobs. We're not going to get elected. I have no prospects of being the mayor of the city of Los Angeles. But I do believe I can significantly affect the political situation in this city by being radical, by being a member of the Socialist Party, or any other group on the left that is willing to organize itself and stand out apart from official liberalism and provide real alternatives to the real problems of this society. It's up to us to start doing it. It's up to us. Nobody else is going to do it. We are the generation that must solve the problems that our generation will have to live with. Let's get started.
Thank you, Mr. Hannon. There will be a brief intermission before our question and answer period.
Problem are. He says, do you think just pouring money into it is enough? Well, no, it's not enough, but it's a great start. Look at what I'm talking about. I got 4 kids, and when my kids go to school, they go to school ready to take advantage of a school situation. If you take for all kinds of reasons, because they're around articulate people, because they see their parents reading, because they come from an environment where a home environment where school and education and middle class things are important, and they're pushed to do these things, and they take advantage of the school. They're prepared for it. But a kid who comes out of the ghetto community doesn't come to school with this kind of preparation. Typically, he doesn't have all of these things that make him ready to take advantage of the school situation. So if you provide my kid and that kid with exactly the same kind of school environment, you are seriously disadvantaging that kid, because the society has deprived him. The state owes him more than it owes to my kid, just to make the 2 kids equal. Now we've got to admit this sort of thing, and we've got to seriously address ourselves to it. And we've got to, there have been minimal programs started. The There's a program of preschool schooling, you know, for kids in the ghetto. But they're such minimal programs. They're such half-hearted attempts. We've got to do things not in terms of 15,000 youth corps jobs. We've got to be doing things on a scale 10 or 20 or 50 times that great. Then we can say we're addressing ourselves to the problems. Otherwise, we're just pretending. Yes. The question was what did I think about having more Negro officers working in the ghetto area. I don't think it's any solution. Well, yeah, it is and it isn't. It is a solution because most of the Negro officers have a much better attitude towards the people they're working with than white officers do. Some don't. Some Negro policemen overcompensate, but they're a small minority. Most Negro officers can't buy the rationalizations, and so they relate to the people a little better. But on the other hand, there's still only 205 Negro officers out of 5,100 policemen in Los Angeles. There aren't enough to go around. Especially there aren't enough to go around when you consider that demographers estimate that 45% of the city's population will be Negro by 1970. That's the Times statistics, LA Times. Now, I don't think you're going to solve the problem by segregating Negro officers in the Watts area. I just think it won't work. Girl back there. Oh, she wants to know why I decided to become a policeman. Well, I was apolitical at the time. I was 21 years old. I'd never been involved in anything. I was sick of working on a drafting board in a factory, and the police department provided more money. And I was married, and I had 3 of my 4 kids already. And besides, I thought it would be fun, and it was fun. You know, it really was the first year or so, because it takes about 3 months before you think you're a combination of Elliot Ness and the Lone Ranger, and you know it's romantic, but the romance wears off in about a year, and you stop buying a lot of the baloney, and I went through an evolution. I don't pretend to have always thought the way I think now by any means. My education was working for 5 years in Newton Division, and I'm speaking now after that education. Yes. Yeah. What about what? What about rights and who's supplying it? The whole goods and services are socially produced in this society. General Motors has a larger budget than many countries. They send ambassadors to 8 nations, General Motors does. You're talking about this is private enterprise? That's absolutely absurd. The shibboleths of free enterprise bear no more relation to this society we live in today than Tarzan and the Apes does. It's just not the same society. What free enterprise? Talking about me going to work as a capitalist and competing with General Motors would be like talking about me getting my wheelbarrow and going out and competing with the Santa Fe Railway from here to Houston, Texas. It's absurd. Goods and services are socially produced by this society, by a technology that produces a tremendous abundance. That produces a tremendous abundance without being able at the same time to provide a rational and an adequate system of distributing what's produced. That's the central contradiction of capitalist society. They can produce the goods, they can't distribute them without messing up the whole economic structure of the society. That's why we have poverty. There's no reason for this poverty to exist. You're not talking about a situation where I go out in the woods with my hatchet and chop down a tree and make something and it's mine because I make it. You're talking about a situation where a man goes to work for Ford on an assembly line, and he and hundreds of other people work cooperatively to produce an automobile, along with other people who designed it and other people who market it. And none of these people whose brains and labor have produced this automobile own it. The owner is the guy who contributes absolutely nothing, who owns the little tickets that give him the right to draw off of this the labor and the brains of other people all of the profit. He winds up with the ownership of the car. The stockholders who have contributed nothing. He didn't start the plant to begin this. His grandfather did. George III's great-grandfather became King of England. That's not any reason to say George III had a right to stay king of the United States colonies, and we threw him out. Human beings have a right to live because they're human beings, not because their granddaddies were wealthy. You say no, I say yes. We disagree. You go with Parker. Next question. The gentleman in the middle row there. No, in the yellow shirt. All of these things are factors. The fact that we had we had all of this open space in this country to exploit. The fact that there was a scarcity of labor during most of America's history that pushed up the price of labor, that created a domestic market, all of these things contributed to produce the capitalization in this country. We have the capitalization now. We no longer have an economy of scarcity in this country now. We have an economy of abundance. That means that we have the technology, and we have the capital and equipment. The machinery and the plants already exist. Now, in addition to this, we draw raw materials and we find markets in countries all over the world, which we treat in a colonial relationship. Most of South America is de facto in a colonial relationship to the United States. They provide us with raw materials, we sell them finished goods, both times at our price. And for instance, when the coffee prices were first stabilized for Brazil by international agreement, the way they calculated what the stabilized coffee price should be was to add up what it costs to produce coffee in Brazil, add on a 10% profit for the coffee owners in Brazil, added nothing to create an infrastructure of roads and schools and so forth for the Brazilian one-crop economy, added nothing to increase the wages of the Brazilian workforce. They were stabilized at 6 cents per hour as part of this agreement, and we get coffee cheap here because of that. This is what I mean. This is what I'm talking about. We enjoy this kind of a relationship. As a socialist, I don't believe we should go on enjoying that kind of a relationship. Yes, the fellow with the blonde hair and the glasses. I'm glad you raised this. You're raising the central problem of alienation. Because the question was, for people in the back who couldn't hear it, that he thinks I've missed the point, because the real point is the fact that work isn't personally satisfying work. This stems out of a basic contradiction in the way work is organized in this country. Because unless we're the very exceptional people who own large corporations and control them, we have the only real choice we have in working is to work for one of these large collectivities, and the chance of engaging in independent business on a small scale as an entrepreneur is decreasing with each year. The chances decrease. The mama and papa stores that existed here 10 years ago all over town are mostly all gone, except in a few pockets like East LA, because chain stores, which can produce the same goods more cheaply, more efficiently, have driven them out of business. Now, we're all going to be working for somebody, and the problem is that we have no control over our work situation. We are employees, and the way the work situations are structured is the boss may not be right, but he's the boss. You workers don't have any say over the way work is carried on in this factory. You don't have any control over what kind of goods are going to be produced or going to be marketed. You have choice only to either work here on our terms or go someplace else. You have to work in this kind of alienated surrounding. This is a central problem that we face. This is something we're going to have to address ourselves to solutions of. There are lots of experiments in workers' control being made in various places, and some of them are successful and some of them aren't. But we have to study these problems and think about them and analyze them, and I'm glad you brought it up. Gentleman in the Pendleton shirt. Yeah, I agree. Okay, the problem is, what do you do with people for whom the society, as it's presently structured, doesn't have any useful work? Okay, there's lots of things you can do with them. For one thing, you can start paying people a decent wage to go to school and improve himself, and to acquire the skills that will enable him to be able to sell his labor in a socially useful fashion. That it's a hypocrisy to say to a guy in the ghetto who's trying to make it with 7 kids, you go to night school and 1 or 2 nights a week and hope you can catch up. At that rate, he's never going to catch up, because by the time he gets sufficient education, he's too old. The only way to solve these kind of problems are to pay him out a salary for going to school. Going to school is hard work. And he's doing something socially useful by making himself a person that is useful to the society. This is one good way to start. And I don't mean a little grudging dole. I mean a living wage. A man's entitled to a living wage if he's going to school. There's no reason why we can say we can't afford it when we can afford extravagances like Vietnam. Gentleman right there in the second, third row. Well, the police department selects for admission to the academy some 3% of the people who apply. They are highly selective. They've got a great many different cutoff points. There's a long background evaluation, an 8-page on both sides of the pages questionnaire that you have to fill out, listing everybody you've known and where you've lived and so forth. You do get run through a little psychiatric examination, but it's a minimal thing. And I really think the police department only uses that to weed out the homosexuals or obvious psychotics, because some pretty weird guys get through. But the place where I feel, and I can't prove this. This is just my own belief. The place where I believe the real subjectivity comes into the selection process is in the physical examination itself. Because the standards are set so high, there isn't a man walking the streets could pass those standards. I couldn't have passed them. You know, I wear glasses and I got flat feet and I got a bugged up elbow. I'd have never gotten through if they hadn't wanted me to get through. And so when they want you for their subjective reasons, they pass you. And when they don't want you for their subjective reasons, you fail the physical exam. I believe that's where the subjectivity comes in. Fellow back on the wall there. Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Could you speak? I couldn't quite hear the question. I think you asked, was I willing to make predictions about the watch situation? Well, I think I did in my remarks. I believe that if we don't really address ourselves to solving the social problems there, we condemn ourselves to repeat the Watts experience. Oh, God, no, I can't put my finger on and say on August 13th, 1966 it's going to happen again. Nobody can do that. When another emotional incident comes along that stirs people up, if the same level of social frustration is still there at that time, it's going to explode again. And it'll probably be worse because people learn from their experiences, and people who rioted or revolted, as you will, once are going to do it more efficiently the second time around. So I think it's imperative that we get a real feeling of urgency about this whole problem. Fellow in the corner, you. Yes. No, I think it's just polarized the groups that are already there. It's dragged some of the people out of the middle onto both poles on this question. Civilian review boards are such an obviously necessary liberal reform, that you wonder why they weren't passed when Social Security was. Now, I'm not talking about a civilian agency that's going to go in and mete out discipline to police officers, because I don't personally think it should work that way. I'm talking about something like the proposal Humanus presented to the City Council about 4 years ago, where the review board is simply a claims commission. And a citizen who's been aggrieved by the police, who's been falsely imprisoned or beat up, goes in and proves his damages and gets an award of damages from the city. This puts a financial incentive on the city to police its own officers, and gives the city some interest in enforcing its regulations on its own police department. I think that's way overdue. But whether it's going to happen right away, I can't tell you. Parker obviously hasn't learned anything. The pogrom against the Muslims down there after the riots were over showed that, which was just you just cannot excuse that situation under any stretch of the imagination. That attack on the Muslim temple can't be excused. And I don't think they've learned anything except that they weren't forceful enough before.
Excuse me. I'm awfully sorry. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, about O'Neill that was freed yesterday. Well, it surprised me. I guess it shouldn't have. I don't know what else to say about it.
Excuse me, at this time.
Pardon me? Okay, I'll be an extreme cat and say it was wrong.
At this time, I'd like to thank Mr. Hannon for appearing on part of the speaker's program.
Thank you all for listening.